All right, well, what's going on, guys? So as you can see today, the rest of the market basically dipped down. The IWM was clearly the biggest loser today. The NASDAQ, a close second. And then the SPY, obviously didn't do as bad as the other two indices. So in today's video, we're going to go over those three indices. We're going to go over what might happen in the future. And then we're going to go over the crypto markets. All right, so without further ado, let's get right into it. So the SPY, all right, number one, when you look at the chart, there's a lot going on. Number one thing that you need to understand is where the prior levels of support are going to be. So the reason why 447.11 is a very strong level of support is because this was an intermediary high back in August. And then we came back and retested that level multiple times. And we made a very clear touch back on August 27th. So that is why that is the closest form of support, aside from 440.50, right? So if 450.50 breaks, right, then 447.11 is going to be the next level of support on the SPY. So there's that, right? Number two, we can see that the MACD is now oversold, right, which is a very good sign. So the fact that we are above support still, the MACD just became oversold now, is a very good sign. So what might end up happening is we would potentially fall to 447, and this oversold MACD line right here, the blue one, will hopefully go down even lower, much faster. Okay, so if it's going down very fast, but the price of the SPY is not going down like quickly, and we can still remain above support, then that is going to be a very, very bullish setup for the SPY. Okay, so those are the things that we need to watch. Another thing, obviously, is that the RSI, it's dipping down slowly, but the key level of support is going to be 447.11. Okay, so we need to keep our eyes on that. All right, next, let's take a look at the IWM. So clearly today, the IWM was the biggest loser, right? And we broke down below the 38.2% fib level. Wow, this is very hard to see here. But we broke down below the fib level right here at 224.09. So we broke that level of support today. We dipped down even lower. But now, it's nothing different. We've just been trading within this range for months now. Okay, so essentially, what could end up happening is if the rest of the market does continue to fall, right, and the IWM basically will follow the rest of the market, right? So the next levels of support on the IWM are going to be 220.80, and then this trend line right here. So this is going to be another very important level of support, this trend line right here. And if you go back to it, this is a trend line that we connected from January 29th. We connected it on multiple touches all throughout this entire period. So now that is going to be the clearest, closest level of support after this 220.80 level. Okay, so we need to see, in the next few days, what is going to happen, whether we are going to continue falling to 220.80 and then create some sort of a support. We might end up, creating a bull flag pattern where we did have a huge run up, and now we are in a correctionary period where we, bounce down to these levels of support, find support, and then continue moving on forward. And yeah, so that is according to like the candlesticks and the technical point. But one other thing is that the MACD on the IWM is not as good as the SPY. So the reason for that is because we had a very, very red 2 days, right? We had a very red day today specifically, right? But as you can see, the MACD did not become that oversold, okay? Whereas on the SPY, it became much more oversold with not as much of a downward move. Okay, so that is a bit worrisome, only because we want to see the MACD becoming oversold very quickly when there is a huge move to the downside in the stock. When there is that discrepancy, then that is somewhat of a warning sign, okay? But we just have to continue monitoring to see how it holds above 220.88 and above this trend line here, which approximately tomorrow is going to be essentially 220. All right, so those are the two main levels we need to watch on the IWM, okay? All right, so next we can go ahead and look at the NASDAQ. So as you can see, just plainly, the NASDAQ is having trouble crossing above this same trend line that we've been monitoring, right? It's still having trouble cross above it, and you can still see it's acting as clear resistance. One other thing is that the MACD does not look as good as the other two indices, right? Because we did have a red day today, but the MACD barely even crossed down into oversold, okay? And one of the reasons for this is because we were so extremely extended to the upside in such a short period of time that, you know, we never even came back and, you know, retested any of these lows here, okay? So what we have to look at is back in April, when something like this similarly happened, we need to see how the NASDAQ responded, okay? So what you can do is look at from August 19th to now, right? And then look at the similarities between March 30th and essentially March 30th to April 30th, okay? So you could see the similarities. So for example, back here, we were very overextended to the upside, found support above this very important level of support, created a base, and then continued on higher. And in the same process, this is where negative divergence happened once more on the MACD, where the price was going higher, but the MACD was going lower. Okay, so that is a sign that we would have a momentary correction. But the correction didn't happen. All throughout this month, we were still sitting here all throughout while the MACD was showing negative divergence until it became extremely oversold. Okay, so once we became extremely oversold, found support here, back here, everyone was thinking that the market was extremely bullish. It was very, very, very like scary bullish on how well the MACD, like in any other circumstance, right? For example, the MACD being this oversold while being right next to all-time highs would mean that we would break above all-time highs and fly all the way up to 356. With the same strength that we had, for example, back here, when the MACD was not as oversold, right? Back in at the end of March. The fact that we bounced off of that so abruptly with a very small oversold condition, right? So now if you applied that same thing back in the end of April, you would think, wow, like the fact that we did that at the end of March into now, my goodness, it's going to skyrocket. But that's not what ended up happening, is because we were so overextended. The markets needed a bit of a breather. We got that breather for about a month. We fell down, and then we became extremely oversold outside of the Bollinger Bands. This was a very good opportunity to buy, and here we are today. Okay, so what I think will end up happening now is we will consolidate, most likely until we do become, you know, oversold once more. Very similar to what happened here, in my opinion. That's something that could end up happening, right? And so there are very key levels of support that we have to watch now on the NASDAQ. So number one, we can look at these very overextended levels here at 373. When you look at how it was trading outside of the Bollinger Bands, right? So when we do trade outside of the Bollinger Bands, every single time that we get this overextended, if you are to buy puts 2 to 3 months out at the money, they have 100% always been profitable. Okay, so even right now, if you were to buy at the money puts, so for example, if you were to buy 380 puts on the Qs for 2 to 3 months out, they have a 100% success rate that they always end up being profitable. And now so more than ever, right? Because we are much more overextended. But of course, we need to wait to see the smarter thing to do in terms of trading would be we would need to see a break of key levels of support. So those key levels of support that we're going to have to be watching are when we did get overextended here. So 373, and then essentially this low here, which is 372. Okay, so those two levels are going to be very important levels of support. So essentially what might end up happening now is we will consolidate most likely within this range here, right? We'll retest lows maybe, right? And during this time of consolidation, most likely what will end up happening is the MACD will become very oversold again, make people very bullish once more, and then similar to what happened back here, once everyone became very, very bullish, and right here on April 26th, everyone was like, okay, yep, we're making new all-time highs. We end up the next day we ended up gapping upward, but then we start falling for 2 days. And then the next day after that, we gapped up and then we made new all-time highs. That was the clear signal where everyone was like, okay, we're going to go skyrocketing. The MACD is oversold. This looks very, very good. But, it was not possible because people wanted to take profits and we overextended ourselves so quickly in such a short period of time that the move was unsustainable and we ended up periodically crashing. Okay. And that's really what might end up happening. So this in turn is a bull flag, right? So which is a bullish pattern. So even if all of those things were to play out and we did fall to this level here, that would potentially be bullish. So, now we need to see if we will break these key levels of support and then go down even lower to the mid 360s. And that's what I think might end up happening, at least, right? That's really it for the NASDAQ. But the thing that we have to also watch and keep our eyes on is the 30-year yield. Okay, so let's take a look at the 30-year yield. So the 30-year yield today bounced up a little bit. It was extremely oversold outside of the lower level of the B band. Things need to start moving upward for the 30-year yield if the NASDAQ wants to continue on higher, because the NASDAQ hasn't what's the word where people, it's not priced in. Sorry. So the NASDAQ has not priced in this very bearish move in the 30-year yield. Okay. And if the 30-year yield does start breaking way more abruptly to the downside, that is when the NASDAQ, I think, is going to start, really showing warning signals. And that's when I think this will end up playing out. Okay. So we need to see how it'll respond around 373. 372, and then of course 369.91, which is essentially 370. Okay, we need to see how the NASDAQ will work off of this condition here and how well it can sustain an oversold condition. But again, this right here, the fact that we were trading outside of the upper level of the B bands is a warning signal, similar to everything that we've seen before. But essentially we need to see how well we can maintain above these levels, and that's really it. For the dollar, you can see the dollar is very bullish. It's working off of this oversold MACD condition very well, breaking above levels of resistance while barely crossing above the oversold condition. So that's a very good sign. Okay, now let's look at crypto. Okay, so Bitcoin clearly had a very huge red day, right? And if you've been watching my YouTube videos, you know that when there is a huge wick to the downside on Bitcoin, either to the downside or to the upside, usually those wicks end up always filling. All right. So let me give you an example. We've gone through a lot of examples. I don't remember. Okay, so this is one, right? So I showed how, you know, it at least fills 78% of a wick. Whenever a huge downward wick happens, for example, here on June 8th or here on May 19th, any of these wicks here, or on June 22nd, all of these wicks end up being filled mostly in the future, okay? So yesterday was no different. So I do believe that, you know, the fact that we did retest 44,500 was a good sign. So now, you know, either Bitcoin is going to go back and retest 43,000 now, and then retest this dark trend line that we've been monitoring as well, which was in the log chart. This was a very, very important level for an uptrend, and once that level broke, it signaled a downward capitulation. And when you unlog the chart, this is a level of support that is very, very important on Bitcoin. And it basically determines whether or not we're in an uptrend or not, okay? So yeah, most likely what will end up happening is we will come back and retest this level. But if 43,000 remains as support, then that is a very good sign. And that means that we can continue on higher. But another thing to look at is that the RSI on Bitcoin fell very sharply, which is a very bullish sign, right? It means that, you know, there's more room to the upside. And the MACD is now oversold as well, okay? So we need to see how in the next few days Bitcoin works off of this huge, you know, move. We need to see how people feel about it. We need to see how institutions and hedge funds treat this now. Are they going to wait for the volatility to subside, or like what are they going to do in the next few days? Okay, but overall, huge dips like this are a good opportunity regardless. And yeah, there's that for Bitcoin. Now we can look at Ethereum. You know, very similar. Whenever there are huge wicks to the downside, they usually end up getting filled at least to 78%. And yeah, I mean, you know, the same still applies. The key level of support on Ethereum is going to be approximately 3,000. But I mean, yeah, at this point, you guys should understand that, like, you know, longer term, this entire space is here to stay. Blockchain technology is very good. Yada, 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 blah, blah, blah. Anyway, the RSI fell sharply. The MACD looks much, much better on Ethereum than it does Bitcoin. Right, as you can see, Bitcoin's MACD is not as sharply oversold compared to what Ethereum looks like, right? So that is a much better sign. It means that there's much more room to the upside. So we just need to continue monitoring which one leads the other. All right, so when Bitcoin does well, Ethereum might lag for a bit, and then Ethereum ends up catching up. But then if Ethereum does well, Bitcoin can end up lagging for a bit, and, you know, vice versa. All right, so we just need to monitor which currency takes the lead in the next few days to help bring up the other. All right, that's really it. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you.